Hello and welcome to this week's episode of #Leadership, What's on Your Mind. It's a very special episode today, and if you're listening on your podcast provider, you'll notice there's more than two voices coming out today. It's our 100th episode, and if you're watching us on the YouTube channel, you will already see I'm joined by three amazing people that have already been on the podcast, and we'll get to there in due time. It's been nearly 2 years now, and I can't quite believe that it is 100 episodes. We started out aiming for just 10, but I'm sure we'll get to the story around that. So to add another 0 on is quite amazing. Like ever, today's episode is around adding value to your leadership journey and bringing amazing people with amazing stories and experts in their field. So hopefully that doesn't bring too much fear into the guests that you might be able to see on the screen. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow us on your podcast provider. And we are continuing. This is not the end, by the way. This is a 60-minute, hour-ish long special episode that we've got planned for a couple of weeks. And it's great to be able to have this platform to bring these amazing people together. So without further ado, I'm going to get each of the guests to introduce themselves. And they've all been on the podcast, like I said, and just give a little bit of a reflection about their episode. So we're going to start with Paul. Paul was on episode 45. Which is not quite, just before halfway. So Paul, introduce yourself, let us know who you are, what you do, how we work together, and a little bit of reflection about your episode 45.
Cheers, Stu. Hello, everybody. Firstly, before I talk about that, Stu, big congratulations to get to this stage. I think it's been a lot of sweat, a lot of tears, probably a lot of pain to get there, and I think it's kudos to you and your perseverance to get to where you are. So well done.
Thank you.
I was on episode 45, which seems a long time, distant time ago, and I think our episode was based around. We've got a similar background, a similar story. We both spent time in the military. I spent 22 years in the Royal Air Force, similar to yourself, Stu. Done a little bit longer, a few more sort of grey hairs and wrinkles, but since then, I left the Air Force 10 years ago, and I've been working in leadership development for the past 10 years. So it's been a good transition from being in the military to working in the corporate industry. I guess the episode and what we talked about, I think we spoke a lot about history and what we've done and some of the activities and some of the things that we've done within our career. And I think that we focus a lot on situational leadership because the environment we were both placed in was fairly high risk, remote environments where there was a lot of key decision making. We were taking people into fairly high risk environments and looking after them and making good decisions and making dynamic risk assessments. And I think if I reflect on that session, what's helped me move forwards is that it's all about being agile. It's about looking at the people who got in front of you, look at the situation you're faced with, and then making a good, sound leadership decision based on that. So really, I think what I've learned from that podcast, when I look back at it again and reflect on it, was it's about giving yourself that time and space. And I think sometimes, maybe in my early days of my career, I didn't give myself that time and space to make a rational, informed decision about what I should do next. And I think working in the outdoor environment like we did, taking people into adventure training and taking them into areas of stretch and really testing them, you as a leader, you've got to make that really safe decision because guess what? You've got people's lives in your hands and you're responsible for them. And I guess I've taken that forwards, and I really, everything I'm faced with now, if you look at the past couple of years, I try and use that model of looking ahead and give myself some breadth and some space and really just saying, okay, what's the right decision for me right now? So it's been interesting. It was great to sort of reflect back on that episode and what we talked about. And but yeah, so it's been living in, and I think it's been great that you've done 55 episodes since that, which is it's been really great. So
awesome. And again, just talking, like listening to you there, that I've had quite a few of our ex-colleagues on, and it's been amazing to touch base again and reflect and have those memories. And again, I say all the time, I don't realize how much I attribute to my time in the military. You don't realize how good the environments and the people were that you were around until almost you're taken out of that, and then you can look at how much value you can give back into the I always say the military bubble, so outside the military bubble, what our experience is worth. So amazing, thank you so much. We're going over to Debs. So Debs was on episode 56. So Debs, introduce yourself.
So I'm Debra Cadman. My background is human resources. So I worked up to become an HR director in a large global IT business. And then about 8 years ago, decided to venture out on my own. So I now also run my own business. And I do lots of things. So I have a lovely little portfolio, like I'm a millennial. So I do some assessments for the Chartered Institute. I do loads of leadership development work now too, and lots of team coaching. So I do systemic team coaching and I do individual coaching, and I just love it actually. And then I work with some SMEs, so I help them with their growth strategy or where they're transforming their business, and help them think about their people strategy. So that's who I am. And my reflections on the podcast I tell you, I only listened to it today, so I feel really bad. I think I'm like one of those actresses that doesn't want to look at their own work. So I made my husband listen to it in the car on the way home tonight. And it's funny how you talked about the military bubble. Do you remember when you asked me to join Star Development, and I was having that massive imposter syndrome thing going on about, all those people you had from the military. But actually what really so the first thing that struck me when I listened to my podcast was, I still feel really passionately about leadership. And when I was listening to myself, I thought, wow, I actually sound like I know what I'm talking about on this. So that was really nice. And I think there's something really, towards the end, we talked a little bit about purpose and the purpose of teams and the purpose of leaders in teams. And it's just interesting that a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment with leaders actually is how do I get my team around me? How do I give them the space to do their own thing? And what does my role become as a leader in that space? And I think that's a new thing. I think as we're starting to try and empower people and give them more autonomy, it's working out where you are as a leader and what you do. And I think the role is shifting, and I think that's really exciting. So got me thinking about that today. And I'll talk more about the podcast I was listening to as well later. So
awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. You've just reminded me as well that I go through like spells of listening back to the podcast. I tend not to. I probably listened back to them more in the earlier days because I was less relaxed recording them as I am now. So there was some really good conversations I had, and I thought I was concentrating on the timer and the lighting and the audio and the visual and all these sort of things. So I need to go back and listen, because the idea is to get my guests to speak most of the time, and I'm obviously subconsciously trying to work everything else out and making sure everything's right. So my relax factor is probably bigger, and I absorb it a bit more in the present moment now. But yeah, it just reminded me, sometimes I do listen, sometimes I don't. So yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. So last but no means least, we have Peter. Peter, you were on episode 55. So the one before Debs actually, Pave the Way. So introduce yourself and let us know some of your reflections on your episode.
Okay, well, before I became a sort of a warm-up artist for Debs, I had a sort of a proper job, really. My career was essentially in large PLC environment. I had an engineering background, which I'll return to in a moment, but working initially for British Aerospace, subsequently BAE Systems, I spent the last few years of my career, in fact, the last 10, 15 really, in the field of international business development. So I found myself looking in particular at defence exports from Europe into Southeast Asia, continental Europe more widely, the US, Canada, and so on. And actually, as a result of that, spent quite a few years working as CEO in Australia of the then BAE Systems company. So I had a tremendous sort of grounding in engineering, but what it led me to sort of believe in leadership terms initially was that you had to work really hard, that you had to drive other people really hard, that you had to be very strong and robust and resilient, and you had to work on the sort of principle that if you pushed people harder, you would get more output and you would be more successful and your peers would sort of revere you. And I found myself increasingly getting out of step with this, because I found myself being sort of in a very different mode. I found myself realizing that my leadership was going to be measured not by my personal sort of levels of effort. It was going to be realizing my ability to realize the full potential of the team. And as you progress through your career and you progress through a company, particularly a large PLC, that team gets bigger. And so therefore it becomes more important to realize the potential of the team, and the rewards are greater, personal rewards, but also team rewards. And so I found myself feeling a little bit out of step. I was a bit sort of soft, perhaps, in the perception of some of my peers. But what has stood the test of time is now, having taken that forward and working as I do now with, for example, Lancaster University Management School, working in support of leadership development in 1 or 2 smaller companies, I've recognized that that is a skill which is really important and is at the core of what we're advocating as a collective in Star Development. That, you know, as Paul says, you know, create the time to consider these things, empower others, you know, develop the team spirit and realize the full horsepower that exists. And so those are sort of themes which I'd like to return to. But in my podcast, when I reflect on that, I did talk a little bit about that, but I don't think I put it across with the experience I've got perhaps in the last just 12 months even, which included a spell with some MBA students from around the world at Lancaster University, where I looked at, I asked them to identify the leadership styles that they aspired to. And I took some big, well-known political figures and presented images of them on the screen. And surprisingly, the strong leaders, as you would sort of assume them to be, didn't fare very well at all. But those who are milder-mannered and who've sort of had the realised the potential of others were supported much more strongly, and this generation really do aspire to that. And not on my set of images, but Gareth Southgate was identified as the England coach as someone that so many people in the room aspired to, someone who was modest, someone who supported others, and someone who didn't, you know, claim credit for other people's activities all the time. So that was quite an insight, which I think reinforced the sort of ethos that I sort of talked a bit about in my podcast. Yeah,
amazing. Thank you so much. So great introductions, and as you will either hear or see, an amazing 3 people to have for the next further time in the podcast to sort of bounce around a few ideas and questions around leadership. So I asked each of the guys to, well, actually one of the options for this 100th episode, somebody mentioned about somebody coming and interviewing me and turning the tide. So I kind of like that, but I'm very sort of, I want to bring amazing people, and not saying that I haven't got any value to add, by the way, but to have a real sort of open, diverse conversation. And I obviously did, I mentioned before about episode 1. There was an option to have somebody who I've got a little bit of a list of aspiring people on, but then also I was kind of like, well, we'll just go to the next guest. Like, they're all really amazing guests, if I may say so myself. And I'm going to share at the end, we've got an amazing guest to kick off in 101 episodes. So wait till the end to hear that one. But we sort of ended with this sort of hybrid version, which I love. It was a great idea by somebody. And I asked the guests to come up with a question for me. So to put a little bit of perspective on there. So we're going to go around. I've got an idea in a general, but I kept this quite open. I didn't want to do any prep for this. So I'll see how this goes. So Paul, do you want to go first? We'll stay in the same order. Off you go.
Yeah, no problems. I've got a few questions which I was thinking about. What do I ask you? Because you've been on this amazing journey for the past couple of years. We've all been faced with a difficult couple of years anyway. So this one, Stu, is related to the past couple of years. Okay, so if we combine the pandemic and combine your journey of setting the business up and getting to where you are with a podcast now, so this is more like what have you learned? So what advice would a wiser, more resilient and experienced Stuart Wannington now give his clients in 2022, which is maybe different to what you would have done in 2020? So yes, it's
that's a big question.
Yeah, go on. So I'm really
question.
keen to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, I think we've covered this a couple of times on the podcast, and I sort of advocate a lot of the messages and the themes that have been mentioned throughout. But it has been really like I started the podcast with my back against the wall. Basically, it was I'd left the military and thought I was going to do lots of little things, and I reflected after about 18 months and I was like, this is not what I left for. I left to do my own thing, kept a couple of things and started my own journey, and then 3 months later the world changed as such, and things shut down, all these words that we're now used to hearing. So it was really, and it very much links to leadership. It very much links to a couple of the messages that I've been sharing with groups recently. Is I had to do something over nothing. And it's that I always say that the word I had to learn when I left the military was that procrastination. Like the military is so used to getting it done and so dynamic, and so kind of we're filling out the people with, Paul, you mentioned decision making. It was a big topic I spoke about even last week with the group, about sound, quality, reactions, decision making. We like, without even calling it that, we trained people to make decisions really quickly and really effectively. One of the big things I talk about off the back of the pandemic, and there was lots of articles written about it, was the people who are great leaders are showing up right now just by the fact of their people are coming back to work. They're not sitting at home happy with the fact of, oh, I'm quite happy here actually, the government is supporting me. Not going too political, but you'll have people. I was only talking to somebody last month who was like, my staff were turning up and they knew I couldn't pay them, but they were turning up and they were wanting to help and support. And so I think there was a real eye-opening for a lot of leaders, a lot of businesses, a lot of cultures. There's a lot more people talking about the importance of culture, investing in people. I think, without putting my neck on the line, there's a lot of people saying they're doing it and not actually listening to the people and what do they actually want. We talked about the softening of leadership. One of the episodes was really pertinent on saying there was a lag in the leadership journey of there are still people out there in a sort of industrial age leadership in the world, in the corporate model. And I think the last 2 years has really shifted that and said that's not acceptable anymore. That's not needed anymore. People won't get out of bed for that. Gary Ridge, that I think we're going to talk a little bit more about, talks about that and has done an amazing talk for me recently for the IOD about it. So yeah, for me moving forwards, I always say that the stuff that we're doing now with Star Development, the fundamental is improving people's self and situational awareness. So what is going on around you? My 4L leadership model I created on a train on the way back from London once was just basically so simple, and it's a trigger system. So look, listen, lead, and learn. So like one of those is just look what's in front of you, listen to what's going on around you. There was a couple of great sort of mentions of this in the last few episodes. I think Chris Gore said about putting your foot on the ball, using a football analogy, just stop. And only last week I shared some of the physical and mental links to, I know one person I've worked with does a lot of walking around in the business, and once they spot themselves doing the same stuff over and over again, they will physically stop walking, take a step back, and then carry on for the rest of their day, because they'll go, right, it's almost like a check-in with themselves. And everybody's different, but everybody does need to do the fundamentals of just stopping and taking a breath. And I joke sometimes about when we say to clients, like, can I have 10 minutes of your day? And the immediate answer is either a long pause and I've asked for the world, or an immediate no. So that busy being busy term that I created of what I saw in the business world rings true still now. And I fit into that category sometimes as well. We're all human. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally it does. And it's interesting to hear your response around the past couple of years. And definitely, I think the work I do within my own business, I work with lots of teams that are facing similar challenges as a result the past couple of years. And it tends to be a definite shift towards leading self and leading others, and the real focus on that. And leaders now start to see the importance of it. So yeah, it's great to hear your views on it.
And again, just to pick up really quickly, you just reminded me. So from when I started the podcast, I've now got a member of staff. So back then, I did everything. I did all the editing. How do you put this thing on YouTube? How do you put this thing on iTunes, Spotify? And now I've got a member of staff, Jasmine, who works behind the scenes. I had an aspiration to record these and then have an amazing team of people that make this even better than I was doing. So implementing what I've learned on the podcast, I hope, I've actually surprised myself about the amount of autonomy and the amount of trust I have straight away, because we can be quite precious about something like a podcast that we've started. But I know, and it starts from recruitment, it starts with having great conversations and being really part of that process. That, and I think Jasmine will admit as well, she's been quite surprised at how much I'm like, this is your thing now. Like, you're really helping me. You do what you want. Like, there's been no time that I've been like, oh, I wouldn't have done that, because I know she's got great creativity, great trust, great autonomy, and it's made it a lot better than it was episode 1. You'd hope 100 episodes in, we've evolved. So awesome. Thank you very much, Paul.
Pleasure.
Debs, fire away.
I've been mulling this over. What I want to know is, who would you choose to be on episode 200? If you could choose anyone in the world,
yeah,
who would it be and why?
That is a big question.
I know.
I'm now regretting not asking for these questions before. Do you know what? That's a great. There's probably a. I'll give myself a little bit of time, okay? Because I thought somebody might ask me about who's been your favourite episode, and I've been quite surprised about. We've had some amazing people on, amazing sort of figures in leadership that are like household names, and I've been quite not surprised, but I think the topic of conversation has been more important than the person. Because again, the idea is to have a diverse conversation about leadership. So the two of the biggest episodes, viewer wise, have been people that you wouldn't ordinarily know. I know them very well, but the topic they spoke about, so one was major failure in business, and I thought I asked Dave Wilcott to come on because it was quite pertinent at the time. It was mid-lockdown. I was thinking there's going to be people out there who are going through similar stories. And even, he won't mind me saying, even I was a bit on the podcast, I was a bit like, wow, there was quite a few things that came out that I didn't even realize. And it was amazing that he said it felt like the right time to sort of share even deeper what had gone on behind the scenes. And then Fran, who'd been on recently, spoke about having a digital detox. And at the minute, we're all talking about this slowing down, and we're all consumed by social media, and even having presence in what you do. Even last week talking about presence, and are you actually listening to the people around you, or are you on your laptop answering emails and somebody's trying to talk at you and you're not actually being present, to keep it simple? So yeah, the people who've had the most thing haven't been the household names, the people who've authored 5-6 books. There've been people who've maybe got the topic that it's actually interesting people right now. So to come back to your question, who would I have on? I would selfishly think, for me, I would have somebody like Simon Sinek on, Matthew Said. I would quite like to have somebody from Google, Amazon, Tesla, and that sort of level of global leadership. We've had obviously Joe Foster on, the founder of Reebok, and to have somebody and really spend time with somebody that has built a global business and brand really makes you think. And I think it's amazing how you can still pull some relatable things to them. And some people say, how have you managed to get some of these people on in the 100 episodes we had? And I kind of like, well, I've just asked. I've asked very professionally and very nicely. But if you don't ask, you don't get. And I've been quite, obviously you make your own luck, but obviously in lockdown, the people were sat at home willing to be able to talk to you, and they've been open. And I kind of want I can't remember which person it was, but they spoke on somebody else's podcast, and I thought, well, they're no bigger than I am. I think I must have been about 20 episodes in. So I think I'm just going to ask, and they said yes. Like, these people who you put on a pedestal of leadership or the organizations they lead or they founded, they are just people. And I'm really quite close friends with some of the people that we still correspond with. So it's amazing to have that connection worldwide now as well from the podcast. So is that okay as an answer?
It is. What was interesting actually as well was when I was listening to my podcast earlier, you and I were talking about how people wear busyness as a badge, I think I phrased it as, and everyone's rushing about saying, oh, I'm really busy, and it's like busy equals important. And because obviously I made my husband listen to it, so we were saying, well, what about people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg? These are really busy people, you'd think, because they're running these enormous global companies, yet they're still doing loads of other stuff, like going to space or so you sort of think they must be super busy, but they're still finding the time to do new stuff, to develop themselves, to lead other things. I just think it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
I definitely think you should get one of those people. Matthew Said would be amazing.
Yeah, trust me, I'm working on it. I've not even reached out yet. I'll wait for his people to contact me.
Yeah.
We'll see. Who knows where we go from here. So thank you very much, Debs. Thank you. Peter, over to you.
Yeah, well, firstly, an observation from me. You and Paul particularly are incredibly privileged because of the experiences you've had in the military environment. And when we talk about training and leadership training in particular, to me, it's extraordinary that if you look at people making a decision to take up a career in the military, and someone, for example, joining the army seeking to be an officer, or going into the Air Force and seeking to be a fast jet pilot or whatever, perhaps their first 3 years are nothing but training. They don't actually do the job that they've signed up for several years, let's say, before they're let loose. If I contrast that with industry or politics or whatever, what typically happens is that people go in, start their job, people then look at sort of their skill set and say, oh, you need a bit of training, or you've done really well as a treat, as a reward almost, we're going to allow you to do personal development training or whatever it is. And it's not quite an add-on. I'm being playful to make a point. But my question to you therefore is, firstly, do you realize you are very privileged because of the level of training, the quality of training, the fact that you've had years of it before you really let loose to do your job? And secondly, is that a strength or a weakness, or a barrier perhaps to empathizing with people in industry for whom training is not the first 3 years of their sort of career? It's an expensive add-on where they have to be paid. They have to pay to do it, or the company has to pay to do it. And when they're doing it, they're not doing necessarily the job that they were employed to do. Their capacity is reduced by the training component. So, juggling that is quite difficult. And I'm just really asking you, and I know this is a bit of a fastball, but does your privilege, because you've had so much experience of training and high quality training at that, does it in some ways hamper your ability to sort of see the industrial perspective. And again, being slightly playful, you can be the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, without a day's training. You'd hopefully got some relevant experience, but you'll have no training in it. You know,
yeah, I love that.
We've got masses of it, and you know, you've got years of it before you even start. How does that all balance out in your perspective?
Yeah, so that's really good that you put that on. We actually talked quite a lot about it in the episode with Rory Underwood, the England international rugby player, and he was he was an RAF fast jet pilot as well at the same time as playing rugby. And we actually said exactly the same, but then he pointed out on top of that when the 5 to 10% of, let's call it 10% of training happens in the corporate world, 5% of that, at least half of that, is just mandated training. It's not actually personal professional development. So yeah, very good point. I'm fully aware of the privilege of the people in the environments that we're exposed to. It's great to point this out, and I say this quite a lot, that I actually left the military thinking I was going to be on the back foot because of that. So I was thinking, I don't have any business experience. This is going to be a real negative. I'm really going to have to fight hard to get into corporate. And there's a little bit of truth in there. And again, suppose because of the podcast, I've now got great visibility of a subject that I'm really passionate about. I like to have conversations, like just diverse thinking about all this stuff. It's not one size fits all. But it's that open and honest approach. Like, I'm open and honest about the fact that I don't have the answers. I say that even in leadership, I sort of joke sometimes saying I'm not the world's expert in leadership. I would say that my expertise, if you like, if you're going to pin me down on expertise, would be facilitation, being able to create the environment to stir up conversation. And the fact that I've got this thing that when I do anything with groups is I purposely introduce myself for my credibility side after everybody else has gone and after we've almost started the workshop. But like I said, it's turned full 360, 180, however you want to call it, because people love that I don't have business bias, and we tell different stories. We have a bit of a joke about abbreviations. People like the fact that you're there to freshen it up a little bit, and you three plus the other amount of amazing associates and people that we've got through, I think all but one or two associates or people we have the ability to put in front of leadership teams are not one-trick ponies. They're able to. The reason I've built the team I have is because I've got a real passion for reading the room, and I sort of will allude to some of the work that we're doing at the end of the podcast, but to have that flexibility, to completely step away from you're here to be trained, because again, that's a real mindset shift, isn't it, for the person that you're trying to then help, or help isn't even the word either. It's kind of like to just give a different perspective, add value wherever I can or we can. And I always talk about the light bulb moments, like and I think I did say it on the first episode, but I'd like to come back to this, that I like that effect when people go, not just thank you, but they just think, I've not thought like that before. And taking that time out has been really valuable. I remember doing a session, it must have been about 12 to 18 months out of the military, and it was with 20 lawyers, and they were all from the civil service, from across all the areas of civil service. And I basically just thought, this is going to be a tough crowd. This is going to really keep me on my toes. And I remember one person in particular came and shook my hand at the end. He said, thank you so much for not wasting my time. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, so many things, because I'm busy being busy, and I'm busy, I haven't got time. A lot of the things are mandated, or it's on somebody else's perspective of why I need to do something. So to have something that's been quite selfish on my behalf, you've posed a few questions that I've not thought about before. So that's my real passion, to box that up a little bit, and then to give that to other people, because we did that in the military. Basic trainees coming through at 17, 18, 19, leaving actually with some quite philosophy like thoughts, and like I've never thought like that before. I didn't realize the military were expecting this or giving me these tools to go forward with. And that was quite powerful when you spent, and Paul, you'll remember these, won't you? The works, excuse me, the 10 minutes the groups did at the end before they went on the bus to go back to wherever they were going. It was like, wow, like some, even the quiet ones, you didn't realize how much they'd thought throughout the week and took things from. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think, you know, the trick, as you say, is to sort of box up those experiences and make them available to other people, other companies, and so on.
Yeah.
And to be able to, you know, promote a set of values and disciplines and structures and so on, which in a normal corporate world, you just don't get exposed to. You have to take yourself out. You have to meet the sort of people that you've brought around you. And the output from that is a really, really, you know, different set of individuals who feel empowered and developed and invested in, which I think is very important. So good on you. Excellent. Keep it up.
Good. Yeah, we will. We aim to, don't we? Yeah. So the next little bit is well, actually, probably leading into probably near the end of this. I've asked each of the guys to think about an episode that they've listened to that they can really take something from or talk about, or obviously we can have a discussion around it, or there can be a question as well. One of the 100 that you've listened to and thought, oh, right, that was interesting. And I know there's been quite a few that you've been sort of banding around. So I'd be interested to see which ones you've chosen. So over to you, Paul. What have you chosen? We'll go the same order. It's easier.
Yeah, this was tough because I listened to a few and it was a lot of good things to pick from all of them. But I thought, because it's the 100th episode, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back and listen to episode 1, which I did. And it was interesting to see you telling your story and where you're coming from. So you had no guests at all on that, did you? It was just you telling your story. And I thought it was great that you were talking about storytelling. You were talking about your journey and where you've been and what you've been up to. And obviously I know it because I've been part of that with you as well. But I think just for you to explain the value you got from your career, and similar to what Peter mentioned there, and you probably didn't realize it at the time, but the amount of training and impact you were getting as a result of being in that environment. Like I said, I think, you know, our similar careers, we were faced with lots of difficult decisions and we had to sort of act quite quickly, but also make safe decisions. So there's a real balance there. But I think a lot of what I picked up from that first webinar, Stu, was around what you mentioned about leading self. And I mentioned it earlier, and leading others. Because I think sometimes it's the focus on leadership is just leading an organization and taking a bit more of what I call a red direct route, but actually developing the people and developing teams and self-awareness was massively important. And I really picked that up with what you spoke about in the first webinar. And it was great again to see that you've done 99 since. But I think for me, it was really lovely to hear your own journey, your own story, what shaped you and why you feel, you know, you are where you are now. And I'm going to sort of, one of the quotes you said there was on the webinar was 70% of habits and behaviors come from the leader within teams. And I didn't know that. And I've been working in this game for a while. I didn't know that. And when you think about it, you're thinking, wow, that is so important. So the way that you show up as a leader, the way that you role model, and some of the work I'm doing now within my own business is around like vulnerability and trust. And how do you build trust within your teams? And guess what? If you're the type of leader that doesn't show any emotion, doesn't express anything, and doesn't show that they've got weaknesses as well, how can you allow your team to develop? And I think that was a real lovely point to hear in that initial webinar. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I know. Just to pick up on that, so I've used that a couple of times recently as well. I always put the caveat in as I can't fully remember where I heard that. It was on a podcast, and similar to yourself, it really made me think. And like I said, I've used it a couple of times recently, and it really makes people think. And I've got this real passion going through this journey of like, who do we work with? And that's one of the reasons that I really want to work with the senior leadership teams, the decision maker, the business owner, the founder, the person at the top. Because I joked recently about the fact of, imagine if you didn't need to do any training with your staff or your company, because you were actually living and breathing it. And it takes time. When I proposed this kind of like asked this question a couple of weeks ago, there was a silence and a real thought going around. They're going, oh yeah, like, imagine if all the things that because in simple terms, the reason I've ended up where I am now is because I saw a lot of people talking about that they wanted an aspirational culture in an organization. And it was almost like we need our people to be on this journey. And going back to what your initial point was, there was no looking at self and the real impacts that you can have on the people around you just by matching and mirroring your aspirational culture, environment, how you lead people. And which sometimes when you lay it out in that simplistic way, people are like, oh yeah, just give me a moment, Stu, to think about that, because that's quite powerful. No,
but it's really interesting. I also thought the final point I want to mention before I hand it over was that because you're on your own for 20 minutes, I felt that you were able to go deeper and really reflect on your own experiences. Sometimes when you're working with guests and you're bouncing off each other, do you always get to that level of depth? And I think having the 20 minutes of listening to you telling your story, that was another interesting point. The level of depth and awareness you got to was really interesting.
Yeah.
So
did you pick up on as well? Because I listened to that this morning, and I think I messaged you to say, oh, we chatted just before we jumped on.
Yeah.
Did you pick up on the fact that when I first started the podcast, the idea was to have one episode a month that I would talk and do 20 minutes? But I've managed to get, and it's quite comical, I started off with about 30 people that I knew that I'd love to interview. And there's 2 people on that list who I still haven't had. So there's one, they are both going to be coming on quite soon. Because obviously getting to 100 has been an episode of, oh, it's got to 100 and you've still not been on yet. There's been lots of reasons why. But we've had so many amazing people that I just quite quickly went, well, there's so much value in so many people that we can connect with and network with, that we didn't get around to doing that. But yeah, you're right. It does take that time. And I sometimes say to people when I work with them one-to-one, I calm the sort of situation of, if I was to just leave you in this room now for the next 90 minutes and walk back in again and just say, just critically think internally, talk to yourself. We all talk to ourselves. And I came back in after the 90 minutes and said, oh, there you go, see you later. And you'd feel better about yourself. You'd probably problem solve quite a few things without me even being there. So for me, being there helps a little bit. But you are right, having 20 minutes for yourself, you can go quite deep, can't you?
Yeah, it was good. It's good to listen to it. Yeah, so good on you. Yeah.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much. So Debs, which episode are you choosing?
So I picked episode, I think it was 24, and it was Gary Ridge from WD-40. And I've listened to the podcast a few times, and also I came to the IOD webinar that he did that you mentioned earlier. So he's just the sort of chief executive I would want to work for, because everything he said just embraced everything we think about leadership in star development and everything I find really, really critical and important to leadership. So he talked about you've got to create the right culture, you've got to determine the values that are right for the organization to create that culture, and then you've got to live them every single day. And he was saying, it's a contact sport and you've got to really work at it all the time. Which is true, it's not something that you just do quickly. And so many organizations do knock out a set of values, slap them up on the wall, and then go, right, those are our values. Yet none of the leaders role model those values. So they don't embed, nobody takes any notice of them. And he was really, he just like living all of that stuff. And then the other thing that really struck me was his, he's got a coaching culture, a learning culture. So everything, he never talks about failure. He talks about learning moments and how do we learn from what's just happened. how important that is, and he's embedded that into the organization, so everybody's working to that, you know, to that methodology, which I think is awesome, you know. And they don't have managers, they have coaches. This is all stuff I talk to my clients about, and they also go, oh, I'm not sure. And I'm like, he's doing it, you know, he's doing it now. And then what was the other thing that really struck me? Oh, it's going back to what you already mentioned, actually. We've talked about it a little bit, vulnerability. So he's very humble. He's got this little mantra, and I can't remember exactly how he says it, but it's almost like, I'm sometimes right, but often wrong, or something. And it's just really nice the way he says it. And he's really happy to be vulnerable with people. And he understands that he's not always going to get it right. And he's comfortable saying, I don't know. Reminded me of, you know, David Marquette, the submarine captain who suddenly realized that he was shoved onto a submarine and he'd never learned about that submarine. And actually, if he made all the decisions, which was what was expected of him, he'd just get it all wrong and they'd all end up dying in the submarine. So it just reminded me of him. So I just thought he was a really amazingly inspirational man, Gary Ridge, or is, because he's still running the company, isn't he? He's fabulous. And who doesn't like a bit of WD-40, you know, squeaky doors, beautiful product.
Yeah.
So,
do you know what? I'm going to slip a really funny story in there quickly. So my dad came round and he brought with him, because I'd asked him to come and help me with something, an old WD-40 can. And when I say old, it was probably from the 50s or 60s. It was rusty. So I took a picture of mine next, because I had a new one next to his, and I sent it to Gary and said, this will be really good. We've been talking about you today. And he sent a great reply. And yeah, just a phenomenal. And again, I would say from the podcasts that we've done, the one that's quoted most, or the people that contact me, is the Gary Ridge one. That when it went out at the time, I probably got more replies and reactions to that one than any other. And the fact, like, vulnerability, you're right, getting to the global CEO of the company and deciding you don't know anything about leadership and you're going to take yourself off to university is so amazing to hear. I still use that when I'm with groups of people that maybe aren't engaged in the lifelong learning process, and like that's phenomenal. And I can't remember the exact wording, like you said, but when he says at the start that the three words that he had to get quite comfortable with is I don't know. And it's just the way. And again, fast forward to now, this is what companies are trying to achieve. They've been doing it for a decade plus. So a tip I hat to sort of these things take time. You can't do them overnight, sort of thing. So thank you so much. That was good. Thank you. Peter.
Hey, well, coincidentally, you just mentioned your dad there, because one of the episodes that I was thinking of going back to revisit was the one I watched when you interviewed your dad, because, you know, we've all got people who have inspired us, and whether they're family members, friends, or whatever. But I was hoping to get some juicy insights into some of your murky pasts or something really embarrassing, but he let us down there, I'm afraid. He was on his best behavior. So the one I've homed in on in the end was actually the most recent one that was broadcast, Wednesday this week, which was with Claire Griffiths, as a Paralympian who has led and participated in the wheelchair basketball events. And I was very struck that what I'd been sort of talking about, this whole thing of empowering others and trying to realize the true potential of the team, was something that she majored on as well in that podcast. And she expressed it sort of slightly differently, but essentially she was saying that working harder does not equal greater success. And that she learned that when things were very tough, and the 2012 Olympic experience that she had in London, where things didn't go to plan, where great expectations of medals which weren't realized, she recognized or learned from that experience and found that actually making sure that the team members had fun, were enjoying themselves, had good food, had plenty of rest, was far more important in terms of, you know, laying the foundations of success than being constantly, you know, training, working harder, excluding all else, and so on, that being more balanced and measured in their approach was likely to be more successful. So that sort of, you know, was very consistent with what I was saying about how I felt a bit out of step with some of my peers in a pretty hard-nosed manufacturing production environments in the early days of my career in particular. And I think I reflected on that and felt that in some ways it's a bit of a shame that when we look at some of the really dominant leaders around the world or on television, and it's hard, it's always awkward and dangerous to personalize, but if I think of, you know, The Apprentice and Sir Alan Sugar and so on, there is still that hard-nosed driving push, you know, you're fired, this kind of threat, you know, the stick rather than the carrot. And yet all the evidence seems to suggest that we've moved on, we've learned more, that people need time to personally develop. They need the opportunity to, you know, have people help them draw out their key skills and so on. And, you know, there is that sort of disconnect perhaps with some of the things that you know, we see, and some of the world leaders that we're, you know, experiencing now, totally out of step with all the science and understanding that we've now got at our fingertips. And I think to turn that back to star development and yourself, Stuart, I think, you know, my firm belief is that we are, you know, in an environment where people are recognizing this, are prepared to invest in this, and that, you know, if I look back at, for example, I made the change from aerospace and defense and big complex industrial projects and so on into joining the board of a small financial services organization in banking and so on. And, you know, I think it's, some sectors are perhaps a bit further behind in appreciating, you know, what we're talking about here. But I think that with your approach and the team that you've assembled, I mean, present company accepted, I think we're tapping into a rich seam at the moment, and people are now increasingly aware of the potential. And Claire Griffiths, I would commend to you to sort of go through, and anyone who's not seen it or listened, to just experience, you know, or build on her experience. And final observation on that one is that she used the term that it was fantastic, or it was lovely to see other people perform around me, and she derived a lot of personal pleasure from the fact that she was contributing to the success of others. And I think, again, back to the sort of core of leadership, I think that is something that you know, we all recognize, and we can build upon with the work that you're doing.
Yeah, amazing. And again, it's great that you've looked at Claire's, because she's probably the newest member of the associate team, because the fact that I've been working alongside her for the last couple of months, and to see and hear some of the things she gets involved with. So the wheelchair basketball is a great medium that she uses for teams of 8 to, I think they've done 200, 300 people, and using the fact that you're giving people the experience of going completely out their comfort zone and learning a new skill, and seeing the emotional journey that you go through, and how many references, and we use the references because of our sports links to the associates of different stories and high performance. And it's going to be amazing to bring that to our clients as an offering. Like, yeah. How outside the box do you want to think with this? Like, what do you want to get your people to be doing? And we've got lots of amazing associates with lots of amazing experiences in lots of different locations that we can get people to think and think outside the box. It's going to be different. And I just pick up on what you said about having my dad on episode 50. I'm very kind of, when people talk to me about starting the podcast, I say, you've got to do it for you. You've got to do it for you, because that's how it lasts. And there might be a couple of other family members coming on in the near future. It's going to be quite interesting. But having my dad on, it was a time capsule moment. So one of those things that I was like, it'd be great to have him on. But funnily enough, my brother rang me quite soon after it went live, and he said, "Oh, do you know what? Because I didn't really know what we'd discussed this." and he's been alongside me on all this, so he hears everything that's been going on. And so I was like, we're just kind of a conversation, and we have conversations all the time, so we're going to be able to fit 20 minutes. I had to sort of say that it was good for the technology and you'll be fine, and sort of calm his nerves a little bit. But then my brother rang me and said, you know, I learned some more things about Dad, because he had a very great story about his experiences, and he's been retired quite a few years now. And he rang and said it was really nice to hear and listen to a story that wasn't just normal as like family to family conversations. So yeah, I'm really pleased how that one came out. So it's good that you got both in there. I like that. So we have about 5 minutes left, if I've got my timings right, but it doesn't matter in the overall time of things. So I'm going to just sort of offer it around the room one more time, because the aim of the podcast has always been to add value to the audience. So almost with a tip the hat, sort of any final thoughts, is there anything that we haven't spoken about in the current climate of leadership that we're all observant of and all practicing and in the thick of dealing with people, teams and organizations, either in there with them or from observing from afar, that you can sort of add value to the audience listening right now? Paul, put you on the spot first. Well, why break a habit?
I'm conscious of doing this short and succinct, really. But I think, again, one of your comments you said earlier, picking up on one of the groups you work with, a group of lawyers, and the lawyer came up at the end of the day and said, thanks, Steve, for not wasting my time. And I think that's really important. And I think leadership is evolving. We've seen it evolve over the years, and certainly evolving in 2022. And I think people want to see the person as well as the leader. So maybe in my early days, when I was on my journey, and even in the days of military, I saw a leader, and all I saw was a leader. I didn't really know who that person was, and I didn't see any vulnerabilities in that person. And there were role models, but I didn't really know who it was. And I think times are changing, and I think teams want to see who the real person is. And you know, we talk a lot about showing vulnerability and showing who you really are. So I think that's what we do here, is we really explore that. And you know, one size doesn't fit all. It's giving people time and space to explore what works for them and what is best suited for them and the people they work with in the organization. And again, just being super flexible and reacting to what's in front of them. So that's my bit.
Yeah, I love that. I like it. You got that, captured that perfectly. Thank you very much. Debs.
Yeah, just thinking about that. So I think leadership is a privilege, and I think we need to respect it as such. And I was thinking about what Peter was saying about how we sort of in business, you get pushed into a role, you're good at that role, and then they say, well, because you're good at that role, we'll now let you loose on people. And you know, that's quite frightening, actually. And oddly, I was talking to some clients today about, you know, the role of human resources, saying it's a shame we have to exist actually as a profession, because really if leaders were great at their job and were doing all the right things, we probably wouldn't need the HR profession at all. And I know some great companies where they don't have HR, they just let the teams self-manage and they work stuff out for themselves, and they get coached when they have a problem. So I just think we're in a really lucky position that we can help teams think all of that through. And I just love the work. I think it's just amazing. So I feel like we're privileged because we're leaders, but we're privileged because we get to help other leaders.
Yeah, amazing. And again, amazing in its simplicity, isn't it? It's kind of maybe gets people to stop and think about that a little bit and add that value to their day-to-day process.
Well, I really don't think that going forward people will accept what they did accept. So, you know, I joined the workforce in the sort of very late 80s. I know I don't look that old, so you know, don't say anything. But you know, then we just would have, whatever we were told to do, we just sort of got on and did it. Now I think there's much more of a can I just question why you've asked me to do that sort of mentality. And David Rock, you know, the guy who created the SCARF model, the neurologist, he was saying, actually, where we used to say, oh, you've got to get buy-in at the top of the organization to push something down, he's now saying, do you though? Put pressure in the middle, let the people in the middle build some pressure and then blow the top off like a pressure cooker. And I think that's happening more and more. We see it politically in things like Arab Spring, but now we see it in businesses as well. So I think, you've got to adapt as a leader, and if you don't, you don't at your peril.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much. Peter?
Well, I'd like to build on both of those points, really, by sort of observing, because I'm, let's be honest, I'm the sort of oldest or most experienced, I think is the most positive way I can describe it, of the bunch. And I'm going to reflect on how things have changed. And if I take Debra's point about constructive challenge and questioning and not automatically assuming that, there's a corporate ladder to climb and you're well suited for it because you've been successful in previous jobs and so on. I think companies are much more open to constructive challenge and people having, their opinions expressed without being sort of batted away. Now, okay, there's only so far you can go with some of that. But I think also with Paul's point about showing your vulnerabilities, and in the podcasts, I think, who would have thought, 10 years ago, let's say, people would willingly come on to an infinite audience, they've no idea who's going to be watching this, and bare their souls and say, I failed at this, and this, and have learned the following. Or, I was put in a job which I didn't do very well because I wasn't well suited to it, or whatever. Who would have thought that TV programs would be looking at, or it would be good viewing, where we listen to people's struggling with mental health concerns? We've moved on in just 10 years. The game's changed, and therefore back to, star development and leadership and what we can all contribute, hopefully. It's just sort of recognizing that this is a different deal. This is not about training people to work harder or do a job better and faster and so on. This is about, as I say, realizing individuals and teams' full potential by recognizing all this stuff that's now become apparent to us, perhaps a little bit belatedly, but has become apparent. So what we've got to do is get in amongst it and contribute where we can.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, I think one of the things that I thought I sort of mentioned it earlier on, but I see it as a privilege to be put in front of the people that we have that are able to allow us to go in and be vulnerable, but also be open to have somebody that has no agenda, no sort of bias, and just go in and ask questions and read the room and go off in whatever direction's needed, rather than us go in with a perception of what we think's required. I think that isn't our privilege whatsoever. This presumption of what a team needs is what I see sometimes. So I think it's a real different direction, different communication, but it's going really well. So thank you so much for your time today, Paul, Debs, Peter. This has been an absolute privilege. I've enjoyed it a lot more than I thought, regards to how easy in the flow it was, not as in anything other than that. Like I mentioned at the start of having just one guest on, it was quite dynamically difficult to juggle a few balls, but I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for joining me. We start as we mean to go on again in 101 episodes, because next week at 6 a.m. we're going to have an Olympic gold medalist join us and talk about their leadership journey in high performance, but personally and as a team as well. So we're going to keep knocking some amazing doors down and getting them to come and share their experiences and their expertise in the leadership field. And as ever, it's just to make people stop and think and add value to their leadership journey. So that's us signing off on episode 100. This has probably been the longest, well, it has been the longest episode, an hour long. But as ever, please let me know your takeaways. Please pass it on forwards. If you are starting the podcast journey with us, good luck catching up to 100. I've got, somebody contacted me and has taken the, what's it called? The baton, I think it was like 94, 95. and they are adamant that they're going to catch us up. So there's little stories like that I love to share, and love to hear from people about what they get from each episode. So thank you again. I won't go around the room because we need to finish off, but thank you so much. Please let me know your feedback. The links and the amazing people that we have at Star Development are all on the website, all linked to this episode. Please go and check us out, and we'll hopefully see you all very soon in the future. Take care and see you all next week. Bye.
Everybody.